Hello everyone, and welcome back to Unsaid Hours. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. My mom used to tell me stories about the house she and my dad rented in North Carolina when I was a baby. I was less than a year old at the time, so I don't remember any of it myself. Growing up, I never took her stories seriously. She drank a lot back then, and when she drank, everything became dramatic. A normal creak in the floor turned into footsteps. A draft became a cold spot that followed her from room to room. A shadow cast by headlights outside became a person standing in the hallway. She would tell these stories late at night sometimes, her voice low and serious. She talked about hearing movement when no one was home. She described seeing someone standing at the end of the hall just for a second, and then nothing being there when she looked again. She swore that sometimes the air in the living room would turn icy for no reason, even in the middle of a North Carolina summer. She said doors would feel heavier to close, like something was pressing against them from the other side. I always assumed she was exaggerating, or misremembering, or trying to make her life sound bigger and more interesting than it was. As a teenager, I would roll my eyes and say she'd probably just had too much to drink. She would get offended and insist she wasn't imagining it. Years later, when I was older and had moved out, I brought it up with my dad during a quiet conversation. I expected him to laugh. I expected him to say something like, "You know how your mom is," but he didn't laugh. He went quiet. He stared down at his coffee for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. "Your mom wasn't wrong," he said. That was the first time I felt something shift. My dad is not a dramatic person. He doesn't like telling stories. He doesn't believe in ghosts or supernatural things. He believes in broken locks, faulty wiring, raccoons in the attic. If something can be explained, he will explain it. So when he started talking about that house and about one specific night, his calm tone made it worse. Back then, he worked graveyard shifts. He would leave for work late at night and come home around 4 in the morning. My mom worked early mornings. Their schedule was arranged so that one of them was always home with me. He would get back, she would leave shortly after, and the house would never be empty. The house itself was small. A simple one-story rental with a narrow hallway that ran from the living room to the bedrooms. My room was at the end of that hall, just a crib, a dresser, and a rocking chair. Nothing fancy. On the night he described, everything started normally. He parked in the driveway just before 4 in the morning. The neighborhood was quiet. Most houses were dark. He walked up to the porch, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. He said the air in the house felt still, like it always did at that hour. The living room was dim except for the faint yellow glow from the porch light seeping through the curtains. He set his keys down on the counter and kicked off his boots. His body felt heavy from the long shift. Graveyard work had a way of draining him in a way daytime work never did. He said it wasn't just tiredness. It felt like his bones were filled with sand. On the couch lay Denai, our white German shepherd. He always described her the same way. Loyal, alert, and calm unless there was a reason not to be. She rarely barked without cause. If Denai reacted, you paid attention. That night, she lifted her head when he walked in, but didn't move. Just watched him, her tail giving a small thump against the cushion. He scratched behind her ears and collapsed onto the couch. He could hear my mom moving around in the bedroom and kitchen, getting ready for work. Drawers opening, the bathroom faucet running briefly, closet doors sliding shut. He kept his eyes closed, letting the sounds wash over him while he rested. She left like she always did. He heard the front door open and close, heard the faint click of the lock. heard her car start and pull away. Then the house went silent. He fell asleep. He doesn't know how long he slept. It might have been 10 minutes, it might have been half an hour. He said it felt like the kind of sleep where you are floating just under the surface, not fully gone. What woke him was not a sound. It was a feeling. That instinct you get when someone is close to you, standing near you, watching you. He said it felt like pressure in the air. His eyes opened slowly. There was someone standing over him. At first, his brain filled in the easiest answer. It was my mom. Maybe she forgot her phone. Maybe she needed something. Maybe she had come back inside. The figure stood close to the couch, looking down at him. He said it was dark enough that he couldn't see clear details, but light from the porch window outlined a shape, a person, upright, still. He blinked, trying to clear the sleep from his eyes. The figure turned and walked down the hallway toward my bedroom, not rushed, not sneaking, just walking calmly. My dad said he wasn't scared yet. He was confused. He thought maybe he had misheard my mom leaving. Maybe she hadn't actually gone. Maybe she had come back inside without him realizing. He closed his eyes for a second, trying to wake himself fully. The then Denai moved. She shot up from the couch so suddenly it startled him. Her ears snapped forward, her body stiffened. The hair along her back rose like a ridge. She stared down the hallway and she growled. Not a warning bark, not a playful sound, a deep, low growl that vibrated in her chest. My dad said he had only heard that sound once before when a stranger had tried to approach the yard late at night. It was the sound of something being judged as a threat. That growl cut through the last layer of sleep in his head. He sat up straight. The hallway was dark. The figure he thought he saw was gone. Denai barked once, sharp and loud, then moved toward the hallway. She stopped at the entrance like she had hit an invisible wall. She would not cross it. That, more than anything, unsettled him. Denai was not afraid of much. He glanced toward the front door. It was cracked open, just slightly. Enough for a thin line of early morning air to slip through. My mom was careful. She double-checked locks. She always turned the bolt, always pulled on the door to make sure it was secure. He stood up slowly, his heart beginning to pound. He called her name. No answer. The house felt wrong now, not just quiet. Wrong. Like the silence was listening back. Denai's growl grew louder. He moved down the hallway. Every step felt too loud against the floor. He reached my bedroom door and pushed it open. He said in that split second, every terrible possibility ran through his mind. An intruder, a kidnapper, someone who had followed him home, someone who had been hiding inside. He was ready to fight. The room was empty. No person, no stranger. But the room itself looked like a storm had passed through it. The dresser had been shoved sideways against the wall. The rocking chair was pushed into the corner. The small table that held baby supplies was overturned. Toys were scattered across the floor like someone had swept them violently aside. The crib had been moved, not inches, moved hard enough that one side pressed against the dresser at an angle. The curtains were blowing inward. The window was wide open. Cold early morning air rushed into the room, carrying the faint smell of damp grass from outside. He looked at the yard beyond the window. Nothing. No footprints below. No ladder. No disturbed soil, just still grass and a pale sky beginning to lighten. Then he saw me. I was standing upright in my crib, not holding on to the railing, just standing there, small fists clenched at my sides, screaming, not the kind of cry babies make when they want attention. He said it was a scream of terror, continuous, raw, like I had been screaming for a while. My face was red. Tears streamed down my cheeks. My eyes were wide and fixed on something, not on him. On the space near the window. He rushed forward and scooped me up. My body was rigid in his arms. I didn't calm down immediately. I kept looking past his shoulder toward that open window. He checked everything: the window frame, the lock, the ground outside, the hallway, the front door. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no scratches, no mud. The front door's lock worked perfectly when he tested it. It closed firmly. There was nothing that showed how someone could have come in and left. And yet, something had stood over him. Something had walked down that hallway. Something had moved heavy furniture across the floor without him hearing a single scrape while he slept only feet away. And something had terrified both Denai and a baby who could barely stand. When my mom came home later and he told her everything, she insisted she had locked the door. She described exactly how she remembered turning the bolt and pulling on the handle twice to be sure. He believed her. He told me that years later without hesitation. He also believed what he saw. They argued lightly about it for a while, not in anger but in disbelief. He would say maybe she forgot. She would say she didn't. But neither of them could explain the furniture or the window or deny. That dog changed after that night. She became restless. She paced at night. She refused to sleep deeply. Instead of lying on the couch, she would position herself in the hallway outside my room. She would stare down the dark corridor like she was waiting for something to return. My dad said she would sometimes growl softly at nothing. They moved out not long after. He told me that wasn't the only strange thing that happened in that house, but it was the one that made him stop dismissing everything as coincidence. When he finished telling me the story, he didn't try to label it. He didn't say ghost. He didn't say intruder. He just said something was there. Now, as an adult, I try to analyze it the same way he would. Sleep hallucination, extreme exhaustion, a break-in that left no trace. Maybe someone moved the furniture and left before he woke fully. But none of those explanations sit right. He wasn't prone to hallucinations. He wasn't a light sleeper. The furniture was heavy. The window would have made noise if it was forced open. And deny. Animals don't imagine things the way people do. Sometimes I wonder what I saw. What was in that room before he opened the door? What stood near my crib while the furniture slid across the floor? Why I was staring at the window when he picked me up? I have no memory of it. But when I hear the story, something deep inside me tightens, like a muscle reacting to a forgotten injury. A small, buried part of me feels like it recognizes something. Not visually, not clearly, just the feeling of being watched in the dark. And even now, when I wake up in the middle of the night and sense someone near the bed, I don't open my eyes right away. Because sometimes I think about my father lying on that couch, half asleep, and something standing over him, waiting. This story happened to a very close friend of mine, or at least, that's what he insists. It was years ago, and he has never changed a single detail since. The same words, the same order, the same little pauses when he gets to the parts he still can't make sense of. I'm not naive. People can misunderstand what they see. People can scare themselves, especially late at night. Memory can be slippery, but I'll say this much. When he called me after it happened, the fear in his voice was real in a way you can't fake for long. I've known him a long time. He laughs at horror movies. He mocks ghost stories. He's the kind of guy who acts like nothing gets to him. That night, something got to him. At the time, he was working late shifts at a gas station on the edge of town. It was the kind of job that drains you slowly. Nothing dramatic, just hours of stocking shelves, cleaning coffee messes, and selling cigarettes to whoever couldn't sleep. His shift ended around 11, sometimes closer to midnight. By then, the world feels shut down. There's a special kind of loneliness to closing a place like that. You're locking the door on the last bit of light and noise you'll see for a while, then stepping out into whatever the night decided to become. That night, the weather was terrible. Not rain, not snow. Fog. The gas station was about 10 or 15 minutes from his house. He lived out past town where the streetlights thin out and the roads narrow and start to twist. There was a small lake near his place. Fog was common because of the water, but he said that night it was thicker than he'd ever seen it, not the mild kind that hangs low in fields. This was heavy, soup-like fog that swallowed everything above your hood and made the world feel unfinished. He told me later he could barely see a few yards in front of his bumper. He finished his shift, turned the sign off, locked the doors, and walked to his car with his shoulders hunched against the cold, damp air. The parking lot lights didn't cut through the fog. They just made bright circles of white, and beyond those circles was nothing. He got in, started the engine, and sat there for a second with his hands on the steering wheel, tired enough that even turning the heater on felt like an extra step. Then he drove. His route home was all back roads. Narrow lanes with trees growing close to the pavement. No wide shoulders, no street lamps. Just curves and dark ditches and the occasional driveway leading into a pocket of deeper darkness. At that hour, it was rare to pass another car. Some nights you could drive the whole way and not see a single set of headlights. That fog turned the ride into something else. His high beams didn't help. They bounced off the mist and made a bright white wall in front of him, like he was driving into a blank screen. So he kept the normal lights on and followed the faint gray lines of the road with the stubborn confidence of someone who knows the route well. The problem was that he drove the way he always drove. He was impatient. He was the kind of person who treated familiar roads like they belonged to him. Even with visibility that bad, he pushed the speed higher than he should have. He turned the radio up to stay awake and let the music fill the car, because silence at night can make you think too much. But the road started to push back. He told me there was a moment near the lake where the car felt wrong. Light. Floaty. Like the tires weren't gripping the damp asphalt the way they should. Not a full skid, not a spin, just that sick sensation that you're one mistake away from losing control. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and eased off the gas a little, telling himself he was being dramatic. And then he saw something. It was a stretch of road where a few houses sat, set back behind trees. In the fog, you couldn't see the houses clearly, just hints of driveways and mailboxes that flashed by in the edge of his headlights. On the right side of the road, there was an old mailbox at the end of a driveway. The house behind it was completely dark. No porch light, no window glow, just a black shape swallowed by mist. And beneath the mailbox post, sitting low near the edge of the road, was a person. He didn't register it at first as a person. He said his brain tried to read it as a pile of something, a trash bag, a fallen branch. Anything that didn't mean he might hit someone. But then his headlights swept over it more fully, and the shape resolved into shoulders, head, and a pale face. He hit the brakes hard, instinctively slowing down, not stopping completely but dropping speed fast enough that his tires hissed on the wet road. He said his mouth went dry. His pulse jumped into his throat. The figure looked wrong. He never used the word ghost when he told it, and he still doesn't. He calls it ghostly looking, like he's trying to keep the story inside a category that doesn't sound insane. But he described the skin as bone white, not just pale the way someone is pale under headlights, pale in a way that seemed to glow faintly against the fog. The figure looked thin and frail, almost too narrow. The kind of thin you see when someone is sick or starving. He thought it was an older woman. That was his first clear impression. Something about the posture, the way she sat under the mailbox like she belonged there, as if she had been waiting. He said she wore light-colored clothing, maybe a nightgown, maybe a pale dress. something that blended with the fog but still stood out against the dark grass. As the car approached, the figure moved. She lifted her head, and she stared at him. Not a glance, not an unfocused look like someone confused on the roadside. He said it was a locked stare, as if she had been waiting for the car, and she knew exactly who was inside it. He felt it through the windshield, through the glare of the headlights, like her eyes weren't reflecting light but taking it in. His instincts screamed at him to keep going, not to stop and ask if she needed help, not to roll the window down. The whole moment felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. He liked seeing someone in the wrong place at the wrong time, can make the air turn bad. Then she raised her arms, both of them, and reached toward the car. It wasn't a wave. It wasn't a hitchhiker's thumb. It was a grasping motion, fingers spread wide as if she wanted to grab the car itself as it passed. He said her arms looked too long in the headlights, like they extended farther than they should have. Thin and angled, joints bending in a way his brain didn't want to focus on. He panicked. He didn't think. He reacted. His foot slammed down on the gas. The engine roared. The tires spun for a second on damp asphalt and then caught, launching him forward past the mailbox and the pale woman. He kept his eyes straight ahead, refusing to look directly at her as the car drew alongside. He felt his whole body tense, shoulders up, breath held. As he passed, he felt a sudden chill in the car, the kind that makes your scalp tighten. It was like the temperature dropped in a single breath. Not in the gradual way a heater cycles, but in a quick, sharp way that felt personal. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He told me he couldn't. He was too afraid of what he might see. He pictured her running behind the car, keeping pace, feet silent on the road. Or worse, he pictured glancing up and seeing her face in the back seat, close enough to fog the glass with her breath. So he stared ahead and drove like he was fleeing something. The rest of the ride home blurred. He turned the radio off, suddenly unable to stand the noise. The silence inside the car felt heavy and alive. His headlights cut a tunnel through the fog, and everything outside that tunnel was nothing. Every mailbox looked like a hunched figure. Every patch of fog looked like a face trying to form. He drove faster than he should have, reckless with fear. Curves came and went. Trees appeared and vanished. He focused on getting home, like home was a physical barrier that would stop whatever he had just passed. Finally, he saw the familiar turnoff to his driveway. A street lamp near his house made a small island of yellow light in the fog. He pulled in, tires crunching over gravel, and parked closer to the front door than usual, like being nearer to the house could protect him. He shut the engine off. The sudden quiet made his ears ring. He sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, breathing hard, feeling foolish and terrified at the same time. His mind started trying to save him by offering explanations. Maybe it was an old woman who wandered from her house. Maybe it was someone confused. Maybe the fog and the headlights made her look strange. Maybe he was just tired. He unbuckled, opened the door. The dome light flickered on, revealing the normal interior of his car. Empty seats, no pale shape hiding behind him, no breath fogging the glass. He stepped out into the cold, damp night, and relief washed through him so hard his knees felt weak. Home. Safe. He walked around the back of the car toward the front door. As he passed the passenger side, where the mailbox figure had been, something caught his eye in the glow of the driveway lamp. There was a smudge on the rear passenger window. He stopped and leaned closer. What he saw made him go still. 2 handprints, clear enough that he could see finger shapes, not random streaks. Not fog marks, not the kind of print you make by resting your palm for balance. They looked like they were made by hands coated in a fine gray dust, or just enough oil to show on the glass. But the placement is what broke him. The prints were dragged. The fingertips left faint trails, angled slightly backward, as if someone had slapped their hands onto the glass as the car moved and tried to hold on. like the car had pulled away, but the hands had stayed pressed for just a second too long. He stood there staring at them, and something inside him turned cold and empty. He told me he knew those prints hadn't been there when he left work. He washed his car regularly. He cared about it. The windows had been clean, and he hadn't stopped anywhere. He hadn't picked anyone up. He hadn't rolled the window down. No one had touched the car since he got in at the gas station. The only time anything had been close enough to that side of the vehicle was when he passed the figure under the mailbox. And he had been moving fast, 40, 50 miles per hour, he guessed. For those prints to exist, that woman would have had to touch the car as it passed, fast enough to make contact cleanly, hard enough to leave both hands, and steady enough that her fingers dragged. It didn't make sense. And the worst part wasn't the physics. It was what the prints implied. She hadn't just reached. She had touched. He didn't stand there long after that. He didn't take a careful picture. He didn't examine the angle. He ran. He fumbled with his keys, got the door open, slammed it shut behind him, and locked everything he could lock. Deadbolt. Chain. Then he turned on every light in the house, even the ones he never used. He went from room to room like bright light could force the world back into normal rules. Then he went to a window and watched the driveway through a gap in the curtains, expecting to see her, expecting to see a pale face turned up toward the house, expecting those long hands pressed against the glass of his car again. Nothing. Just the silent car sitting under the street lamp with two handprints on the rear window. That was when he called me. It was past midnight, but he didn't care. He needed a human voice, something that could anchor him. When I answered, he started talking fast, stumbling over his words, and I could hear him breathing hard like he'd been running. His voice shook. He kept lowering it, then raising it again, like he was arguing with himself about whether saying it out loud would make it more real. Fog, he said. The lake, the mailbox, the woman, the reach, the chill, the handprints. I tried to calm him down. I offered every explanation I could think of. Maybe he brushed against the glass earlier and didn't remember. Maybe someone at the gas station touched the car. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe the fog made him see something that wasn't there. He wouldn't take any of it. He insisted the prints were fresh. He insisted he saw her reach out. He insisted the marks were not old smears but clear palms and fingers. He told me he felt like the car had been touched by something that didn't belong to his world. The next morning he went out in daylight. The handprints were still there. He tried to take a picture, but sunlight and glare made it hard to see, and the photo didn't capture the way it looked in person. Eventually, he washed the window because he couldn't stand seeing them. He said leaving them there felt like leaving a door open. After that, he changed his route home. He added 20 minutes to his commute just to avoid that stretch of road by the lake. He never drove past that mailbox at night again. Not once. Years later, if you bring it up, he still goes quiet. His face still changes. He still tells it the same way. He never tries to make it sound bigger. He never adds dramatic details to impress anyone. If anything, he tries to keep it simple, because saying it plainly is the only way he can stand it. He believes completely that what he saw under that mailbox wasn't living. He believes it was waiting in the fog, and he believes that if he had slowed down, if he had stopped, if he had rolled that window down even an inch, it wouldn't have been content to leave handprints on glass. I don't know what I believe. I wasn't there. I didn't see the prints. I didn't see the pale face or those hands reaching toward the moving car. But I know my friend. I know what his voice sounds like when he's joking, when he's bored, when he's trying to impress someone. That night, he sounded like someone who had just learned how thin safety can be. Ever since he told me, I think about it whenever I drive through fog. Why, how you sit inside a locked metal box and convince yourself you're protected. How you pass things in the dark and assume they can't reach you. How fast you can go without realizing you've turned your car into a small, moving room that can be touched from the outside. When fog starts to roll over the road now, I slow down. I keep both hands on the wheel. I check my mirrors more than once, and I try not to look too hard at anything pale sitting under a mailbox, waiting for a car to come close enough to grab. It was the middle of winter, the kind that makes the whole world look muffled. Snow sat thick on the streets and rooftops, and the night outside our windows had that pale glow it gets when streetlights bounce off white ground. It was Christmas break, which always felt like stepping out of real life for a while. My sister and I were home from college, back in our parents' house, and the comfort of it hit you the second you walked in. The heat was steady, the fridge was full. The familiar creaks and smells made you feel like you could exhale. When my sister and I were home together, we fell into old habits. We stayed up late. We talked about people we hadn't seen in years. We watched terrible late-night television and laughed too hard at things that weren't actually funny. The rest of the house went to sleep early like it always did. My parents were upstairs in their room, and after the last bathroom light clicked off, everything got quiet in that deep, our settled way a house gets when it believes everyone is safe and accounted for. We were downstairs in the den, curled up on the couches like we had been as kids. The TV volume was low, so we wouldn't wake anyone. The room was mostly dark. The only light came from the flickering screen and the colored Christmas tree lights twinkling in the living room next door. Those lights threw soft reds and greens across the walls and made everything look a little unreal, like the house was part of a holiday postcard. We were bored and we were home, which is a dangerous combination if you're young enough to still believe you're invincible. Somewhere in the lazy, giggly mood of that night, we decided to get high. Not a lot, just enough to take the edge off and make the late-night movies seem smarter than they were. We smoked a little weed, sank deeper into the cushions, and let the warm, floaty feeling settle over us. For a while, it was perfect. We whispered jokes, laughed at infomercials, and felt like we were wrapped in a bubble of safety. Then the munchies hit, hard. Suddenly we were talking about food like it was the only thing that mattered. Chips sounded wrong. Cereal sounded depressing. Anything that required turning on lights and making noise felt risky. Then we remembered the fudge. My mom made homemade fudge every Christmas. Not the cheap kind from a box. The real, rich, smooth kind that made your teeth ache in the best way. She had made a fresh batch earlier that day for a big family party happening the next afternoon. I remembered watching her pour it onto a large ceramic plate, spreading it out carefully, then covering it with clear plastic wrap while it cooled. It sat on the kitchen counter like a perfect slab of chocolate temptation, strictly off limits until the party. My sister and I looked at each other. We both knew we shouldn't touch it. We were adults, technically, but in our parents' house, you still felt like you could get in trouble the way you did as a kid. And my mother cared about presentation. She would notice if the edges looked messed up. She'd notice if the wrap wasn't tight. She'd notice everything. But we were high, hungry, and full of that reckless confidence that comes from being warm indoors while the world outside is frozen. We decided we'd be careful, we'd be smart, we'd be sneaky. We crept into the kitchen like we were sneaking into a museum. The kitchen was dark except for a faint wash of light coming through the window above the sink. Outside, the snow reflected streetlight just enough to paint weak shapes on the counters. The whole house felt asleep. We moved slowly, holding back laughter, stepping around each other like we were trying not to disturb the air. The plate of fudge sat exactly where it had been left, covered neatly in plastic wrap, smooth and tight. Even in the dim light, it looked glossy and perfect. The smell hit us the moment we got close, chocolate and sugar and something warm and homemade. We peeled back the plastic wrap carefully, trying not to make the crinkling sound too loud. In that quiet kitchen, even plastic sounded like thunder. We held our breath and listened. Nothing. No footsteps upstairs. No shifting, just silence. We grabbed a butter knife and went at it like surgeons. We didn't cut into the middle. We weren't idiots. We shaved thin slivers from the edge, tiny pieces, making sure the cut lines stayed neat. We even smoothed the sides afterward, pressing gently with the knife to make the block look untouched. We ate quickly, whispering and giggling, feeling proud of ourselves. Then we pulled the plastic wrap back over, stretching it down as tight as we could and smoothing it so it looked pristine. We stood back, admiring our work like we'd just committed the perfect crime. Then we tiptoed back to the den and sank into the couches again, a chocolate sweetness on our tongues and smug satisfaction in our chests. Time blurred the way it does when you're half laughing and half zoning out. Eventually, the high started to fade into sleepiness. I checked the clock and realized it was later than I thought. I was also waiting for a phone call from my boyfriend at the time. Back then, we weren't glued to cell phones. If someone was calling you late at night, they were calling the landline. Now I wanted to be in my room so I could talk quietly without my sister listening. So I grabbed the cordless handset from the base in the kitchen and headed upstairs. I told my sister good night. She waved lazily from the couch, still awake, still watching TV. I walked through the dark hallway, climbed the stairs, and made my way to my bedroom. I closed the door, climbed under the covers, and set the phone beside me. The bed was warm and the weight of the blankets felt like safety. The house around me was silent. I stared at the ceiling and waited for the phone to ring, drifting in and out of a light doze. I don't know how long I was there, an hour, maybe more. Enough time for my thoughts to get loose and for sleep to start pulling me under in slow waves. Then my bedroom door burst open. It wasn't a gentle push. It flew open hard enough that it banged against the wall. I jolted up, my heart punching against my ribs like it wanted out. My sister came in fast. Not walking, running. She shut the door behind her and threw herself onto the bed like she was trying to disappear into it. In the dark, I could still see her face clearly enough to know something was wrong. She was shaking. Her eyes were wide and wet. She looked like she'd been running from something, and her breathing was fast and shallow, like she couldn't get enough air. But she wasn't screaming. She was whispering. "Give me the phone," she hissed. "Where's the phone?" "Give it to me." I was still half asleep, my brain dragging itself up from the bottom of a dream. "What? What are you doing?" I whispered back. She didn't answer. She started digging through my blankets like she was searching for something that could save her life. She tossed pillows aside. Her hands moved frantic and clumsy, shaking so hard I could hear the fabric rustle. Tears ran down her face and disappeared into the darkness, but her voice stayed low, like she was terrified to make noise. Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "We need the phone, right now." We found it buried under the duvet. She snatched it so fast it almost flew out of my hand. Her fingers were shaking so badly she could barely hit the buttons. I thought she was calling a friend, or maybe our parents. But she didn't dial any normal number. She dialed 3 digits, 911. The moment I saw it, the last of the weed haze vanished. My stomach dropped hard. The air in my room suddenly felt colder. What are you doing?" I whispered, my voice sharp with fear now. "Why are you calling the police?" She pressed the phone to her ear and grabbed my arm with her other hand. Her grip was painfully tight. Her mouth was close to my ear when she spoke, and I could feel her breath trembling. "There is someone in the house," she whispered. I froze. For a second, I couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat. I listened hard, trying to catch something through the walls. Footsteps. A door opening. A voice downstairs. Nothing. My sister spoke to the operator in a trembling whisper, giving our address, saying she heard an intruder downstairs, saying, "Please, hurry." When she hung up, she didn't look relieved. She looked like she was about to fall apart. We didn't wait for the police to arrive without telling our parents. The idea of officers showing up with lights and noise, while my dad slept upstairs, felt like it would turn into chaos. So we ran down the hall and burst into our parents' room, shaking them awake. My dad sat up confused and irritated at first, blinking into the darkness like he couldn't understand what reality he was in. My mom's face went instantly fearful the moment she saw our expressions. "The police are coming," my sister whispered. "I heard someone downstairs. Someone's in the house." My dad's first instinct was to get up and go check. He swung his legs out of bed, already shifting into protector mode. My sister lunged forward and grabbed his arm, begging him not to. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "Don't go down there," she pleaded. "Please, don't." And then my own panic added a stupid layer to the fear. The weed. We had left our pipe and stash on the coffee table in the den. If the police came in and started looking around, they might find it. In my young mind, this felt like a second disaster stacked on top of the first. But the thought of going downstairs to hide it made me feel sick. If there really was a stranger in the house, I'd be walking straight into them. So I stayed upstairs and tried not to think about it. We heard sirens in the distance. Then the flashing red and blue lights reflected off the snow outside and danced across the walls in my parents' room, making everything look like it was underwater. My sister flinched at every sound. My mom held her hand. My dad stood near the door, tense, listening. Then there were heavy footsteps downstairs. The police. Their boots sounded loud on the hardwood. Radios crackled, doors opened and closed. Voices murmured quietly, professional, controlled. My dad went down to talk to them while my mom, my sister, and I stayed upstairs, huddled together like children again. Every sound from downstairs made my skin crawl. A closet door sliding open, a drawer being pulled, a door handle turning. My mind filled in shapes, a stranger hiding behind coats, a face peering out from a dark corner. After what felt like forever, my dad came back upstairs with 2 officers behind him. "They didn't find anyone," my dad said, relief and frustration mixing in his voice. "The back door was unlocked, but there's no sign of forced entry. Nothing's missing. They checked everywhere. Basement, garage, all of it." The officers were kind, the way cops sometimes are when they know someone is shaken and embarrassed. They suggested it could have been the wind moving something, or an animal, or just the house making noise. They said they would patrol the area for a while, but as far as they could tell, the house was clear. My sister shook her head violently, tears still fresh. "I heard him," she whispered. "I know I did." The police left. Their lights faded. The house settled back into silence. But the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It felt exposed, like the house had been opened and then closed again, but something had slipped inside before it shut. None of us wanted to go back to our rooms. My sister couldn't stand the idea of being alone. If I'm honest, neither could I. My dad decided he would stay awake the rest of the night, sitting in a chair near the bedroom window. My mom, my sister, and I climbed into my parents' bed, squeezed close under the blankets. We lay there listening to the wind outside, the occasional soft pop of the house heating system, every tiny creak magnified by fear. Morning came slowly, the gray light creeping across the room like it was testing the air. With daylight, fear always tries to shrink into something you can laugh about. My dad had fallen asleep in the chair. My sister sat up and rubbed her face, looking exhausted and embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "We were high. Maybe I imagined it. I feel stupid for calling the police." "It's okay," I told her, even though a part of me was relieved she was saying it. Better safe than sorry. We all went downstairs, tired and stiff, ready to let the night become a weird story we'd tell later. The house looked normal in the daylight. The Christmas tree lights were still twinkling. The den was quiet. The snow outside looked bright and harmless. Everything felt like it had been reset. My sister walked into the kitchen first. I followed behind her, already thinking about coffee. She stopped so suddenly I almost ran into her back. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there staring at the counter. "What?" I asked, stepping around her shoulder. Then I saw her face. All the color drained out of it. She looked sick. Her eyes were fixed on something on the counter like she was staring at a dead animal. She started backing away, shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." My pulse jumped. What happened last night?" I said, louder than I meant to. "Tell me right now." She lifted one shaking finger and pointed at the counter. "The fudge," she whispered. I looked. The ceramic plate was still there, but the plastic wrap, it wasn't smooth anymore. It was peeled back and crumpled, twisted like someone had yanked it off quickly without caring about noise. It lay bunched to the side, not tucked neatly over the top. And the fudge. A huge chunk was missing. Not our careful little shaved slivers. A human-sized portion had been torn off, jagged and uneven, like someone grabbed a fistful and broke it away. It looked brutal, greedy, the kind of bite you take when you don't care if anyone notices. The kind of bite you take when you're sure you have time. My sister's voice came out strained and breathy. "I was in the den," she said, and I could hear her trying not to cry again. "The den is right next to the kitchen." I heard rustling, loud rustling. Like plastic wrap, it went on, like 10 minutes. I just sat there frozen, listening, because I knew someone was in the kitchen. I didn't move until I got up the nerve to run past it to the stairs to get to you. I stared at the plate, unable to blink. The kitchen had an open archway to the den. No door, no barrier, just a line between rooms. For 10 minutes, my sister had sat a few feet away from someone in our kitchen while they unwrapped my mother's fudge in the dark and ate it. Not quietly, not quickly, like they were comfortable. My dad came in behind us, drawn by our voices. He saw the plate and immediately tried to force logic onto it. You could see his mind doing what minds do when something threatens the idea of safety. "It must have been a mouse," he said, but his voice didn't carry conviction. "There are no teeth marks," I said, my mouth dry. "No droppings. And look at the plastic." My sister started crying again, not loud, not hysterical like the night before. This was quieter, heavier, like something inside her had finally landed, because the truth was simple in the worst way. Someone had been in our house. Someone had walked into our kitchen while my parents slept upstairs. Someone had unwrapped the fudge, slowly enough to make noise for 10 minutes. And then they had left, leaving almost nothing behind except a missing chunk of chocolate and plastic wrap twisted like a signature. Nothing else was stolen. The police report would be filed as a false alarm. Our weed was still sitting on the den table untouched, like the universe was mocking us. But the feeling of violation didn't disappear with daylight. It dug in. My dad spent years insisting it had to be an animal. He checked for holes. He set traps. He caught nothing. He didn't want to accept the idea that a stranger had been close enough to touch our kitchen counter while he slept. Over time, the story turned into a family joke the way scary things sometimes do once you survive them. We called it the fudge monster. We laughed about the idea of a burglar with a sweet tooth. We acted like it was ridiculous, like it belonged to the same category as weird holiday mishaps. But there was always a moment when the laughter died. A brief pause where everyone pictured the same thing. A dark kitchen. The soft, loud crinkle of plastic wrap. Someone standing at the counter in the middle of the night, eating like they had all the time in the world. And two daughters upstairs clutching a phone, whispering for police, while the person downstairs finished their snack and slipped back out into the snow. In my hometown, there's a place everyone knows, but most people learn young not to treat it like a normal place after dark. It's a graveyard on the edge of town, big enough that from a distance it looks like a patch of uneven black-green land stitched into the countryside. What makes it feel different isn't just the headstones. It's what sits beside it and how the land is built around it. Behind the graveyard there's a river. It isn't the kind of river that rushes and sparkles. It moves slow and dark, wide enough that the opposite bank looks like a strip of shadow. It makes almost no sound unless the wind is right. On the other side of the graveyard, there's a large open field, the kind teenagers have used forever because it's out of the way, half hidden, and no adult wants to walk out there at night to tell you to go home. Between the field and the graves is a stone wall. It's not a pretty wall meant for decoration. It's old and thick and rough, made from dark stones that look like they were hauled there by hand. It stands about 8 feet high and runs long enough that, as a kid, you could walk beside it and feel like you were following the edge of a different world. On top of it, nature has gone wild. Ivy and thick shrubs climb up and over, spilling down the field side in dense tangles. During the day, it just looks overgrown, like something the town stopped maintaining decades ago. At night, it becomes a shape, a mass of black leaves and crooked branches that cast shadows like reaching fingers. My brother and I have been fascinated by one specific story tied to that place since we were about 10. It wasn't a story meant to make us feel safe. It was one my dad told in a casual way, like he wanted to keep it light, but you could hear something underneath. A tension he didn't want to admit was still there. Whenever we drove past that graveyard, my brother and I would start asking for it. So tell us the bush story. Tell the one about the wall. Tell the one where you ran. Dad would sigh, pretend he was annoyed, then tell it anyway. It had happened about 30 years ago when he was 17. He was living the standard small-town teenage life. Friends, late nights, nowhere to go that didn't feel watched by adults. So you end up in places like fields and riverbanks because they're the only places that feel like they belong to you. That night, it was him, his girlfriend at the time, and a big group of their friends hanging out in that open field beside the graveyard wall. They weren't doing anything special, just talking, laughing, maybe drinking a little, passing the time until someone's parents started waking up and noticing their kid wasn't home. Dad always emphasizes how still the air was. It's the detail he returns to every time, like he needs it to be understood properly. He says there was no wind at all, and not even the light kind that moves grass tops or rustles leaves. The trees were fixed. The field was quiet. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. It was around 2 in the morning when the group's conversation started to thin out. Some people were sitting down, some were standing, some were messing around, but the energy had slowed. That's when someone noticed something and said something like, "What the hell is that?" A section of shrubbery on top of the stone wall started shaking. Not the gentle movement you'd expect from a breeze. Not a small rustle like a bird shifting. It was violent. The branches thrashed back and forth as if something was gripping them and yanking hard. Leaves flickered. Twigs snapped against other twigs. It looked like the bush was being attacked. Everyone went quiet. People looked at the trees. Nothing moved. They looked at the grass. Still. The air stayed heavy and flat, the kind of stillness you feel in your ears. Yet that one patch of shrubbery kept shaking like it was caught in a storm that existed only in that exact spot. Dad said the group just stared for a few seconds, the way a crowd stares when they're waiting for someone else to decide what it means. A couple of the girls got uneasy. Someone whispered that they should leave. Another person made a nervous joke that fell flat because nobody laughed. Dad was 17. He was with his girlfriend. He wanted to be brave in front of everyone. He wanted to be the one who didn't scare easily. He didn't want to be remembered as the guy who ran from a bush. So he did what teenage boys do when fear shows up and pride tells them to punch it in the face. He puffed his chest out and told everyone to relax. He said it was probably an animal. He said he'd go see what it was. His girlfriend, for reasons Dad still doesn't fully understand, decided she was coming too. Maybe she didn't want to stand back with the group feeling scared. Maybe she wanted to be part of the moment. Maybe she didn't want him walking off alone into the dark. Whatever the reason, she took his hand and followed him. They walked along the wall trying to get a better angle, but the shaking seemed to be happening on the other side, inside the graveyard, and the wall was too high and too overgrown to see over from the field side. To reach the other side, they had to go around to the cemetery entrance. They left the group behind, with their voices fading into the background. The closer they got to the gate, the more the world changed. The field felt open. The graveyard, even from outside, felt enclosed, like the air inside it belonged to something else. The iron gate was there like it always was, old and heavy. The town hadn't bothered locking it at night back then. Dad said it was partly because nobody thought they had to. It wasn't a place people went to steal from. They pushed the gate open. The hinges groaned. A long metal sound that seemed too loud in the still night. Stepping into the graveyard was like stepping into a colder layer of air. Dad always says the temperature felt different inside those walls, even though it didn't make sense. The moonlight lay over the headstones in pale strips. The grass between the graves looked darker, almost black. The place smelled faintly damp, like soil that never fully dries. They walked carefully, not wanting to trip over uneven ground or old roots. They headed toward the back wall near where the river ran. As they got closer, the sound of the shaking became clearer. It wasn't just leaves moving, it was frantic, scratchy, the sound of branches being forced against other branches again and again. Dad said his heart started beating harder at that point, not because he believed in ghosts, because his body was finally catching up to what his mouth had refused to admit. Something was wrong. They reached the spot. The wall was close to the edge where the land sloped down toward the river. The bushes were thick there, tangled into a heavy mass spilling over the top of the stonework. That was the patch shaking. They stopped a few feet away. Dad squinted into the darkness, trying to see through the leaves. His girlfriend squeezed his hand, harder now, like she wanted to pull him back. But Dad stayed still, eyes fixed on the moving branches. At first, all he could see was shadow. Then he saw the shape. It wasn't an animal. He knew what animals looked like. A fox, a cat, a dog, a badger. Those bodies move a certain way. They have a pattern. This wasn't that. It was a small humanoid figure crouched inside the bush. About 4 feet tall, Dad estimated later. But at the time, he didn't measure it. He just registered that it was too small to be an adult and too solid to be a cat. The figure was dark, almost completely black, like it had been cut out of the night itself. He couldn't make out clothes or facial features. He could only see an outline, shoulders, head, arms reaching out. And the arms were moving. Hands were gripping branches and shaking them hard, violently, rhythmically, like it was playing or struggling or trapped in a loop it couldn't stop repeating. No voice came out of it, no panting, no breathing, no cry, just the shaking. Dad said his mind tried to solve it quickly. It must be a prank, it must be a kid. But then reality pushed back. What kid would be in a graveyard bush at 2 a.m? What parent would let a 3 or 4-year-old wander to a riverbank? And the figure wasn't moving like a teenager in a hoodie, trying to scare people. It was too small, too wrong, too silent. The longer he looked, the more his courage drained away. Something primitive took its place, the kind of fear that doesn't come from imagination but from instinct. He said the hair on his arms stood up. His mouth went dry. His girlfriend made a small sound, half gasp, half whimper, and that broke whatever was left of his teenage pride. He grabbed her hand and ran. He can't remember if he screamed or if she did. He only remembers turning and sprinting through the rows of graves like his life depended on it. They stumbled over uneven ground. They didn't care how loud they were. They didn't care about respect for the dead. All that mattered was distance. They burst through the iron gate, slammed it behind them without thinking, ran along the outside of the wall and didn't stop until they reached the group in the field. Dad said everyone knew something was wrong just by looking at them. His face was pale. His girlfriend looked like she might throw up. They were both gasping for air. Dad didn't even fully explain it there. He just told them they needed to leave, now. That whatever it wasn't a fox, and it wasn't a prank, and it wasn't worth finding out more. The group didn't argue much. Something about Dad's expression must have convinced them. They got into cars, drove off, and never went back to check. For years, that was the story. The 4-foot figure in the bush. It became something my brother and I almost enjoyed. The way kids enjoy scary things when they know they're safe. We laughed at the idea of Dad being so frightened he ran. We teased him about it. He teased himself. He called it the thing in the wall bush, like giving it a silly name made it smaller. But he never changed the details that mattered. The lack of wind, the violent shaking, the silence, the size of the figure, the location near the river. As time passed, Dad grew up and left that town. He moved to Birmingham, started his adult life, got married, had 2 kids, went through a divorce, built a new routine that didn't involve late nights in fields. But even after all that, he never forgot the graveyard story. When we visited our grandparents back home, he'd sometimes drive us by the place and point out the spot. There, he'd say, that part of the wall, right near the river. I stood in that field once during the day as an adult. The wall looked exactly like he described. The ivy and shrubs hung over in thick tangles. The river was close enough that you could hear it if you listened carefully. Even in sunlight it felt unsettled, like the ground remembered things. Then something happened that changed how I heard the story. It stopped being a spooky family tale. It became something else. Recently, our family gathered for my grandparents' wedding anniversary. It was warm and comfortable, the kind of evening where people eat too much, lean back in their chairs, and start wandering through old memories. We had finished dinner and were sitting around with tea. The conversation drifted into stories about the past. Dumb teenage risks, near-death moments. Dad was talking about a time he almost drowned as a teenager, swimming in a place he shouldn't have. He laughed a little while telling it, but you could tell it still scared him when he thought about it. My grandmother, who remembers everything, nodded along and started talking about how dangerous the local water can be. She mentioned that river by name, the one beside the graveyard. Then she said something casual that made the room tilt. Do you remember, she asked my grandfather, that poor little mite who drowned there years ago? It was all over the papers. Dad looked up. Which one? He asked. My grandmother's face softened like she was about to speak carefully. It was a terrible thing, she said. A little toddler, a boy, I think. He wasn't more than 3 or 4. The words landed heavy. She explained that a local family lost track of their child, just for a short time. The way it can happen in a small town where people assume everything is safe. The child wandered off. Somehow he ended up near the graveyard. Somehow he climbed up onto that large stone wall. Kids climb. Kids don't understand height the way adults do. He slipped, But he didn't fall into the field side where people might have heard him. He fell on the graveyard side, down the steep bank, into the river. The river was deep and slow there. The wall and shrubs blocked sound. It was secluded. Nobody heard him. By the time anyone realized where he had gone, it was too late. My dad went pale. Not a little pale. The kind of pale where the blood drains out of someone's face and you see a different person underneath. The table went quiet. My brother and I looked at each other, then back at Dad. We were all doing the same math at the same time. 3 or 4 years old, 3 or 4 feet tall. Fell from that wall near the river. The exact spot Dad always pointed out. The timeline worked too. My grandmother said it had happened a few years before Dad's teenage years, which meant it would have been fresh enough in town memory, but not necessarily something a 17-year-old boy would think about at 2 in the morning with friends. Dad sat there with his teacup halfway to his mouth, frozen like he had just seen the figure again in front of him. For 34 years he had told the story as a confusing, frightening thing he couldn't explain. He had never connected it to something real, to a tragedy with a name and a family behind it. He put the cup down slowly. "Mom, Dad," he said, voice rougher than usual. "I never told you this, but when I was 17." And for the first time, he told my grandparents the full story. Not the cleaned-up version, not the one with jokes. He described the field, the windless night, the shaking shrubbery, the walk into the graveyard, the cold air, and the small figure crouched in the branches near the river, shaking the bush like it couldn't stop. When he finished, nobody spoke right away. My grandmother covered her mouth with her hand. My grandfather stared at the table like he was trying to see something in the wood grain. The room felt different after that. The anniversary warmth didn't disappear, but it became layered with something heavier. Not just fear, sadness. Because suddenly the figure Dad saw wasn't a monster in a ghost story. It might have been a child who died in that exact place, still tied to it in some way nobody understands. A child locked into a nighttime pattern of movement, shaking branches like a game, like a struggle, like a reflex that never ends. That thought sits in my mind now when I think about the story. It changes everything about it. It makes it feel less like a thrilling tale and more like something you shouldn't repeat lightly. I still think about Dad being 17, trying to be brave for his girlfriend, walking into a graveyard in the middle of a windless night. I think about how quickly bravery can vanish when your body recognizes danger before your mind can name it. I think about him staring at that small outline in the bush and how, in that moment, he didn't know the history. He didn't know there was a real little boy connected to that spot. He only knew something small and silent was moving in the dark where nothing should be. And I wonder the same thing he wonders sometimes when the story comes up, though he doesn't say it out loud much. If he had stayed a few seconds longer, would it have stopped shaking the bush? Would it have turned around? Would it have looked at him? And if it did, would he have seen a face? Or would he have seen something worse than a face? Something water leaves behind when it takes a child and refuses to give him back. It's strange how stories change with one new piece of information. For most of my life, it was Dad's ghost story. Something to tell on long drives. Something creepy but distant. Now it has weight. Now it feels like a place holding onto a tragedy so tightly it still moves at night. The next time I go back to my hometown, I don't think I'll visit that field. See, I don't think I want to stand beside that wall and listen to the river. I'm happy to leave that place alone, to let it stay what it is, an old boundary between the living and the dead, covered in tangled ivy, casting hand-like shadows when the sun goes down. Some things aren't meant to be investigated, some things are meant to be respected, and some places, once you know what happened there, stop being just creepy, they become real. few years ago, during the kind of summer that makes everything feel damp and heavy, I lived in a house I still think about more than I want to. I only stayed there for around 3 months. That doesn't sound like enough time for a place to get inside your head, but it was. It was a student house a few blocks from the Jesuit university where I was studying, and it had that tired, older look you see in neighborhoods, built long before anyone cared about modern comfort. The wood floors groaned no matter how carefully you walked. The doors didn't latch right unless you pulled them hard. The paint was peeling in corners and around window frames. At night, even with the lights on, the house always seemed to keep a little darkness for itself. That summer was supposed to be easy. Most of my roommates had cleared out. One went overseas with a youth group in Australia and kept posting pictures of beaches and bright skies like he was living in a different world. Another went home to visit family for weeks. Another had moved out for good, leaving his room empty, the door half open like the house was holding its breath. For long stretches it was just me, alone in a big place meant for 5 or 6 people. A student house is loud when it's full, but when it's empty, it becomes something else. Sounds travel. You hear the refrigerator cycle on from across the building. You notice the pipes. You catch the click of the AC and the settling of old wood. The silence has shape. I wasn't completely alone, though. I had a friend, a guy I'll call Andre, who came by a lot. We both had campus jobs, so our days lined up. We would work in the morning, get off around 5 or 6, grab food, then come back to the house. We'd play video games, watch movies, sit around and talk. Having him there made the place feel normal. When he was in the living room laughing at something stupid on the TV, I didn't pay attention to the way the hallway seemed too long at night, or the way certain rooms stayed cooler than others even with the AC off. It's funny what you ignore when you're not alone. One night, that routine broke. Andre didn't come over, and I decided to go out with another friend, a girl I'll call Karen. There was a party happening, and she really wanted to go. I didn't. I was already tired, and I'd spent enough time in sweaty, crowded rooms full of drunk strangers to last me a lifetime. But Karen was determined, and I knew the pattern. If I didn't go, she'd go anyway. She'd drink anyway, and she'd still need to get home somehow. I didn't like the idea of her driving late at night, even if she insisted she was fine. So I went. The party was exactly what I expected. It was loud in that way that makes your teeth feel slightly numb. The air was thick with sweat and perfume and warm beer. People talked too close. Music shook the walls. Karen had the time of her life. She drank like she was making up for lost time, and by the time the party was winding down, she was past the point of pretending she was okay. She laughed too hard at things that weren't funny. She leaned on me when we walked. Her words ran together. I guided her to her car and put her in the passenger seat. I drove us back to my place, windows down to keep her awake, enough not to get sick in the car. On the way, she mumbled that she didn't want to go all the way back to her house. Her place was about 30 minutes away. The thought of her in the car for that long while drunk and miserable didn't sound good. She asked if she could crash at my place. I told her yes. It wasn't even a question. We got back late, well after midnight. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a parked car's cooling engine sound loud. The student house looked darker than usual. A big shape with windows like blank eyes. I remember noticing how the porch light didn't quite reach the corners of the front yard. It made the house seem like it was withdrawing into itself. I helped Karen inside. She was stubborn in a drunk way, insisting she was fine, then nearly falling over when she tried to take her shoes off. I offered her one of the empty bedrooms upstairs. There were plenty, but she was too far gone to process what I was saying. She collapsed on the living room couch, pulled the cushion under her head like it was a pillow, and refused to move. I put a blanket over her and set a glass of water on the coffee table where she could reach it if she woke up. I stood there for a moment just watching her breathe, making sure she was actually asleep and not about to roll off the couch. Then I decided to go to my own room. My room was the strange part of the setup. It wasn't really in the main house. It was a converted space behind it. I connected to an old standalone garage unit. To get to it, you had to walk out the back door of the house, cross the yard, and follow a concrete path that ran like a narrow driveway toward the street. My door was a large sliding glass door. I liked the space because it felt separate, like I had my own little apartment. When the main house felt too loud, I could disappear back there. When the main house felt too quiet, I could still close myself in and pretend I was somewhere else. That night, the separation felt comforting. I walked out the back door, locked it behind me out of habit, and crossed the yard. The grass was damp, the air warm and thick. There was no wind, just that sticky stillness you get in late summer nights when the world feels half asleep. I slid the glass door open and stepped into my room. Cool air hit my face. The hum of my little AC unit made a soft, steady sound that felt like safety. I sat at my computer to decompress. I didn't want to go straight to bed after the party noise. I wanted to erase it. I decided to smoke a little weed, not enough to get lost in my head, just enough to relax. I packed a bowl, smoked, and settled into the quiet of my own space. Music low, screen lights soft. The minutes stretched out. My body loosened. About an hour passed. Around 2 in the morning, I had a sudden sober thought that cut through the haze. I should check on Karen. She had been extremely drunk. People choke in their sleep. People stumble around half awake and fall downstairs. I didn't want to wake up to something awful because I was too lazy to walk across a yard and make sure she was breathing. So I stood up, stretched, and stepped outside. The night air felt heavier now, like it had cooled just enough to make the humidity press against your skin. I crossed the yard toward the back door of the main house. The house was completely dark. No lights, no movement behind the windows. It looked empty, even though I knew Karen was on the couch. I reached the back door, turned the knob, and stepped inside. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the silence shattered. First, I heard a shuffle, like someone's feet scuffing over wood. It was close enough that I stopped immediately, my hand still on the doorknob. In the second that followed, the shuffle turned into a run. Not a casual run, a full sprint. Heavy footsteps hammered fast and hard, I charging straight toward me down the hallway that led from the kitchen area toward the rest of the house. My body locked up. It wasn't a choice. It was like my muscles made the decision before my brain did. My heart slammed so hard it felt painful. I couldn't even inhale properly. The sound was unmistakable. It sounded like a large man in boots, running as fast as he could, and it was coming right at me. But then, in the middle of that terror, my brain noticed something that didn't fit. There was no echo. There was no vibration in the floor. If someone was running down that hallway, the house would react. Old houses react to everything. The floor would shake. The sound would have depth. But this was different. The footsteps were loud and close, yet the floor beneath me was still. And then I understood why. The footsteps weren't on the floor. They were above me, on the ceiling. It sounded exactly like someone was sprinting upside down. Heavy boots slamming against the plaster, racing directly toward the spot where I stood frozen in the kitchen. Thump, 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 rapid and aggressive, closing the distance fast. It reached the point directly above my head, then it stopped. Not fading away, not moving past, stopping like someone had slammed on invisible brakes. Silence hit for a split second, so sharp it felt like pressure. Then there was a crash from down the hallway near the front of the house. It sounded like a stack of heavy cardboard boxes being knocked over and tumbling down. A chaotic rolling sound that went on longer than it should have, like one box hit another, then the whole pile collapsed and slid. It came from one specific room, the bedroom across from the living room, the one near where Karen was sleeping. My mind went straight to the worst answer. Someone was in the house. Someone had broken in. Someone had been waiting. And that crash was them going into that room. The weed in my system might as well have vanished. Adrenaline burned through everything. My thoughts were sharp and ugly. I pictured Karen waking up confused, a stranger in the room with her. I pictured her hurt. I pictured blood. I pictured myself walking into something I couldn't handle. "Karen," I called, forcing my voice to work. No response. "Karen!" I yelled louder, and my voice sounded thin in the darkness. Still nothing. A cold, yet sinking certainty settled into me. This is it. This is how you die. It wasn't a dramatic thought. It came the way panic comes, as if it had always been waiting for the right moment to appear. I imagined a man standing at the end of the hallway, just out of view, listening to me breathe. I imagined him smiling. I imagined him moving again, right above me, just on the other side of the ceiling. Every part of me wanted to back out the door, run across the yard, lock myself in my garage room, and call the police. But I couldn't leave Karen in there, even if I was wrong, even if I sounded stupid, even if I was high and paranoid. If she needed help, I had to know. So I did what people do when their fear is too big. I tried to talk it into being smaller. I whispered to myself, barely audible, "Okay, you smoked. You're paranoid. You're hearing things. You're freaking out for no reason. It's just you. Chill out. Go check on her." My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, but I forced them to move. I stepped out of the kitchen and into the hallway. The house was pitch black. The darkness wasn't soft. It was thick, layered like it had weight. Shadows stretched along the walls. The air smelled stale, like old carpet and dust. I listened for anything. Breathing. Footsteps. Another sound from the ceiling. Nothing. That silence was almost worse than the running. It felt like the house was waiting to see what I would do next. I moved toward the living room, slowly trying to keep my breathing quiet. My eyes strained, trying to turn darkness into shapes. Every doorway looked like it might hold a person. When I reached the living room, I looked at the couch. It was empty. The blanket was tossed aside. The cushion was slightly shifted where her body had been. Karen was gone. My panic spiked so fast I felt dizzy. I started to shout her name again, already turning in a circle, trying to see into every corner at once. And then I saw her. She was standing in the doorway of that bedroom across the hall, rubbing her eyes like someone pulled out of a deep sleep. Her hair was a mess. Her face looked puffy and tired. She didn't look scared. She looked annoyed. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice thick and groggy. I stared at her like my brain couldn't accept what my eyes were telling it. My chest was heaving. Sweat ran cold down my sides. My hands shook. "What the fuck?" I blurted, my voice loud and sharp. "What are you doing in there? Were you making all that noise?" She blinked at me, slow, confused by my tone. "I was asleep," she said. "I moved to the bed because the couch sucks." I looked past her into the bedroom, expecting to see chaos. I expected to see a pile of boxes knocked over. Something smashed. Something moved. I reached for the hallway light and flicked it on. The light washed over the walls, bright and normal, like it belonged to a different world. The bedroom was tidy, empty. There were no boxes, no mess, no overturned furniture. Just a bed with rumpled sheets where Karen had crawled in and a small dresser against the far wall. My mouth went dry. "Okay," I said, struggling to get my brain to line up with reality. But I heard, "Are you okay?" She nodded, looking more irritated now. "I'm fine." "You didn't hear anything?" I asked, desperate. "The running, the crashing?" She shook her head. No, I didn't hear anything. What are you talking about? She was telling the truth. I could see it. She wasn't playing with me. She wasn't frightened. She was just hungover and confused about why I was standing in the hallway acting like the house was on fire. I realized if I told her I heard something sprinting on the ceiling, she would either laugh at me or panic. Neither option felt helpful, and I didn't want her to be afraid in a strange house while drunk. So I swallowed it. Never mind, I said, forcing my voice down. Go back to sleep, I'm sorry. I thought you might be sick. She mumbled something I couldn't catch and crawled back into bed. Within seconds, she was asleep again like a switch had flipped. I stood there in the hallway with the light on, staring into that tidy room, trying to understand how I could have heard something so clear and so violent when nothing had moved at all. After a while, I turned the light off. Darkness returned instantly, swallowing the hallway again. I backed away, step by slow step, as if leaving too quickly might draw attention. I walked out the back door, crossed the yard faster than I meant to, and slid into my garage room. I locked the glass door and checked it twice. Then I sat on my bed, fully dressed, listening. I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that sound again, the heavy, impossible sprint right above my head, rushing toward me in the dark. Over the next few days, I tried to explain it away. Weed can mess with perception. Old houses creak. Maybe an animal was on the roof. Maybe something fell in a closet and I imagined the rest. I tried to make it into a story I could live with. Then Andre came over again like normal. We sat in the living room playing video games, the house feeling harmless, with another person there. A little while into it, I paused the game. Hey, I said, trying to sound casual. Something weird happened the other night. I told him everything. I told him about coming in from the garage, the footsteps, the ceiling, the crash, Karen, the empty bedroom. I told it like a joke at first, the way you tell something scary when you want the other person to laugh so you don't have to take it seriously. I expected him to smirk. He didn't. His face changed in a way I'll never forget. The color drained out of it. His eyes widened like he had just seen something move behind me. Oh, shit, he said quietly. Footsteps? I stopped talking. What? He leaned forward, lowering his voice like the house might hear him. Yeah, I've heard that. A cold chill slid up my spine. You're serious? I asked, watching his face carefully. I needed to know if he was messing with me. I'm serious, he said. When I sleep over here, I hear stuff. Walking in the hallway when no one is up. Sounds like somebody moving around. I've wanted to tell you, but I didn't want you to think I was paranoid. We sat there in silence for a moment. The paused video game music, faint and cheerful on the TV, completely wrong for the way my stomach had dropped. It's crazy, I said slowly. How many stories people don't tell because they're afraid of sounding crazy? Andre nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. That conversation cracked something open. After that, I couldn't pretend it was only me. A few weeks later, the other roommates came back. The house filled with life again. Doors opening, voices in the kitchen, laughter. Music, the normal mess of people living in close quarters. You'd think that would have made it better. In a way it did, because the house was never silent anymore. But in another way it made it worse, because the strange things didn't stop. They just had more witnesses. One night we were all sitting around the table eating dinner, and I finally mentioned the footsteps. I didn't even go into the ceiling part at first. I just said I'd heard running late at night when I knew no one was awake. The reaction was immediate. People stopped chewing. Someone laughed once, too quickly, and then the laughter died when they saw my face. Then everybody started talking at once. One roommate said he heard scampering footsteps late at night, usually between 2 and 3 in the morning. Not just one step, but back and forth movement like someone pacing or running. He said he always thought it was one of us getting up for water until he realized the house was asleep. Another roommate said sometimes he'd wake up early, go into the kitchen to make coffee and find every drawer and cabinet open. Not one or two, all of them, wide open like someone had gone down the line opening them quickly and then walked away. Nothing stolen, nothing thrown around, just open. We all sat there imagining it. A kitchen full of open drawers looks ridiculous in daylight, but at 5 in the morning, half awake, it would feel like the house was presenting a grin full of teeth. The guy who had lived there the longest listened quietly. He'd been there the year before. He looked tired in the face, like he had carried something privately and didn't like being forced to put it on the table. "You know," he said finally, voice low, "the landlady told me something when I first moved in." Everyone leaned in a little. He pointed down the hallway toward that bedroom across from the living room. "Her father used to live here," he said. "He died about 5 years ago. He died in that room. The room Karen had slept in. The room where I heard the crash of boxes that didn't exist. The room where the running footsteps had stopped. It felt like a weight dropped into the middle of us. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. You could hear forks scraping plates, then even that stopped. It wasn't that the story explained anything. It didn't. But it connected too neatly to ignore. It gave our fear a place to sit. After that, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It's hard to describe, but once something is named, you start seeing it everywhere. Every creak sounded like someone moving. Every shadow at the end of the hall looked slightly too tall. Even laughter felt forced sometimes, like we were trying to prove the place couldn't get to us. One of my roommates took it harder than the rest. He was religious, and the cabinet story had already freaked him out. Hearing about the death pushed him into a different kind of fear, the kind that doesn't fade with daylight. He said he didn't want to mess around with something he didn't understand. He contacted a priest from the university. When he told us that, I thought he was joking. I pictured movie scenes, candles, shouting, dramatic voices. It didn't feel real. But the priest actually came. He showed up in the afternoon in a clerical collar, carrying a small bag like he was on his way to do something ordinary. He walked into our messy student house, stepping around shoes and backpacks like he had seen worse. He didn't act afraid. He didn't act impressed. That made it weirder. We stood awkwardly in the living room while he spoke in a calm voice, asking basic questions. When did we start noticing things? Was anyone playing pranks? Was there anything unusual about the house's history? He listened without judging us. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell us we were crazy. He treated it like people treat sickness, even if you don't understand it. You don't mock it. Then he began. He went room to room. He prayed quietly. At times he spoke in Latin, the words smooth and old, like they belonged to walls like these. He sprinkled holy water in the corners of rooms, along door frames, down the hallway. He placed crucifixes in a couple of spots, including near the hallway and near that bedroom. When he stood in the doorway of the room where the landlady's father had died, something about the air felt tight. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was the way all of us held our breath at the same time. But it felt like the house was paying attention again. The priest finished, said a final prayer, and left as simply as he arrived. For the rest of that day, the house felt quieter. Not silent because we were there talking and moving, but quieter in the way your body gets quiet after a loud argument ends. It felt like something had settled, or maybe we just wanted it to. I didn't stay long enough to find out what lasted and what didn't. My lease was up not long after that summer. I packed my things from the garage room, loaded my car, and moved to a new place across town. I didn't look back. I didn't ask the new tenants if they heard footsteps at night. I didn't want to know. Part of me still doesn't. But sometimes late at night, when I'm alone in a quiet apartment, I remember that sound. The sprinting, the weight of it, the way it moved straight toward me. Not across the floor, but above me, as if the rules of the house were different for whatever made it. And the worst part is how clear it was, how physical it sounded, how certain my body felt in that moment that something was coming. People joke about haunted houses like it's a fun story. They think it's about seeing a shadow or hearing a creak. They don't talk about the way your mind tries to save you by denying what you heard, even while your heart is already sprinting. I still don't know what ran above my head that night. I only know it stopped directly over me, in the exact spot where I stood frozen, and the house went silent like it was listening for what I would do next. And I am still glad I don't live there anymore. This happened when I was around 10 years old, and even now, years later, I can still see that day clearly. Some memories from childhood fade around the edges. Faces blur, conversations disappear, but this one stayed sharp. It returns in pieces, the glare of sunlight on the water, the smell of salt in the air, the long, pale path cutting along the cliffs, the sound of our shoes scraping over gravel. And then the cottage, the quiet, lonely cottage sitting in the field as if it had been left behind by time, and inside it, the mirror. Our school had planned a long walk along the coastal cliffs to a village a few miles away. The teachers told us it would be educational and healthy, which meant it was mostly about tiring us out while pretending it was for our benefit. Still, we were excited. The weather was perfect. The sky was bright and clear, the kind of blue that makes everything look sharper than usual. The sea below stretched out endlessly, glittering in the sunlight. Waves rolled lazily against the rocks far below, their sound softened by distance. We were told to stay in groups and not wander too close to the cliff edge. There were teachers spaced along the line of students and a few older students volunteering as helpers. At 10 years old, a 3 or 4 mile walk felt like an expedition. We treated it like one. Some kids raced ahead, others lagged behind. A few stopped to collect small stones or wildflowers. I was with 3 of my closest friends. We had formed the kind of tight little unit children do at that age, where you feel safer together than apart. We stayed near the back of the group, partly because we were talking and partly because no one was really rushing us. Behind us trailed one of the older students, maybe 16 or 17. He had been assigned to keep an eye on us, though he clearly didn't take that job seriously. He walked with his hands in his pockets, occasionally kicking at the dirt, sometimes with headphones resting loosely around his neck. He wasn't paying much attention. To us, that felt like freedom. As we reached the highest stretch of the cliffs, the landscape changed slightly. The path widened and flattened. To our right, fields opened up, long grassy stretches broken only by patches of wild plants. The sea was still visible to the left, but farther away now, is separated by a drop of jagged rock. That was when we saw it, the cottage. It sat alone in the middle of one of the fields, about 100 yards off the path. From a distance it looked simple and square, with white walls and a dark roof. 2 stories tall, small windows, nothing remarkable at first glance. But the longer we looked, the stranger it seemed. There was no driveway, no parked car, no fence, no garden. The grass around it was tall and uneven, like no one had cut it in years. The paint on the walls had peeled in large strips, exposing dull gray patches beneath. The windows were dark, reflecting nothing but sky. It looked abandoned. We slowed without really meaning to. All 4 of us stared at it. "Do you think someone lives there?" one of my friends asked. "It doesn't look like it," another said. The older student behind us didn't say anything. He didn't even glance toward the house. He just kept walking slowly, assuming we would follow the main group. Then we noticed the door. It wasn't closed. It wasn't wide open either. It was slightly ajar, pushed inward just enough to leave a narrow dark line visible from where we stood. The wind brushed against it now and then, making it move a fraction of an inch with a faint, uneven creak. That small detail made it impossible to ignore. An open door invites curiosity, especially for children. We looked at each other, silently asking the same question. No teacher was nearby. The rest of the students were already moving ahead along the path. The older student behind us still wasn't paying attention. We stepped off the path. At first it felt like a harmless detour, just a quick look, just a peek inside. We told ourselves we wouldn't go far. The grass brushed against our legs as we crossed the field. The closer we got, the more obvious the neglect became. The windows were streaked with dirt. The wooden frame around the door was cracked. One of the upstairs shutters hung slightly crooked. Up close, the cottage didn't just look abandoned, it felt it. We reached the front door and stood there for a moment, listening. No voices, no movement, only the distant sound of the sea and the wind moving through the grass. One of my friends pushed the door gently. It swung inward with a long, low groan. The air that drifted out was cooler than outside, stale, damp. It carried a faint smell of old wood and something else, something earthy, like a place that had been closed up too long. We stepped inside. The interior was empty, completely stripped of furniture. The floorboards were bare and dusty. Sunlight filtered in weakly through the dirty windows, casting pale rectangles onto the floor. The walls were plain and discolored with age. There were a couple of small rooms on the ground floor, both empty. Our footsteps echoed more than they should have. Every creak of the wood felt louder than normal. We found ourselves whispering without knowing why. "It's creepy," someone muttered, but we kept moving. At the far end of the ground floor stood a narrow wooden staircase. It curved slightly as it rose, disappearing into shadow near the top. We should have left then. We didn't. The stairs looked fragile, the edges worn down from years of use. Dust lay thick along the banister. One of us placed a foot on the first step. It creaked loudly. We hesitated, then we climbed. Each step complained under our weight. Tiny particles of dust floated in the sunlight streaming from above. Halfway up, I felt something shift inside me. A strange awareness, like being observed. It wasn't a sound or a sight, just a feeling. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the one who got scared first. At the top of the stairs was a small landing with two doors. One door was closed, the other stood open. And across from that open doorway, leaning slightly against the wall, was a large mirror. It was taller than any of us. The frame was dark wood, chipped and cracked. The glass was spotted and dull, as though it hadn't been cleaned in decades. It didn't hang straight. It leaned at a slight angle, reflecting the narrow landing and the stairs behind us. For a moment, it was almost funny. 4 kids standing in a dusty old house, staring at their own reflections. We saw ourselves clearly enough. Flushed cheeks, messy hair, eyes wide with curiosity. The mirror made the landing look deeper than it was. Then something changed. It took my brain a second to process what I was seeing. In the reflection behind us, in the doorway at the top of the stairs, stood a man, a grown man. He wasn't sharply defined. His edges seemed blurred, like heat rising off pavement. He was tall and broad-shouldered. His head nearly reached the top of the doorframe. His clothes were indistinct, dark shapes blending into shadow. His face was the worst part, not because it was clear, but because it wasn't. It was there, but without detail, as if it refused to focus. He was standing only a few feet behind us. My stomach dropped so hard, it felt like I might faint. No one spoke. We all turned at once. The landing was empty. The doorway behind us showed nothing but the staircase and the dim light below. No man, no shadow, nothing. For a split second, my mind tried to correct itself. Maybe it had been one of us. Maybe the angle was strange. We turned back to the mirror. He was still there, closer, not rushing, not lunging, just stepping forward slowly as if he had all the time in the world. One deliberate step. His shape seemed darker now against the pale background of the wall. My chest tightened so painfully I thought I might scream, but I couldn't move. It felt like the air had thickened, like the house itself was holding us in place. Another slow step. He was close enough in the reflection that it looked like he could reach out and touch the back of one of us. I don't remember who moved first. Maybe we all did at the same time. The spell broke in an explosion of panic. Someone gasped loudly. Another shouted something I couldn't understand. We stumbled backward, crashing into each other. One of my friends nearly fell against the mirror. I remember the fear that it might tip over and shatter, trapping us there. We bolted. The staircase that had seemed narrow before now felt impossibly tight. Our shoes pounded against the wood. The steps shook beneath us. I thought I felt something rushing behind me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I had looked and seen him in the real hallway, I don't think I would have survived that moment. We burst through the front door into bright sunlight. The sudden light almost hurt my eyes. The wind hit my face. The open field felt enormous compared to the cramped landing upstairs. We ran. We didn't slow down. We didn't check behind us. We ran as if something was chasing us, though nothing was visible in the field. My lungs burned. My legs ached. The grass whipped against my knees. When we finally reached the path and caught up with the other students, a teacher called out to us, telling us to stop running. We must have looked wild. Pale faces, wide eyes, gasping for air. What happened?" she asked. None of us answered. How could we explain that a mirror had shown us something that wasn't there? We walked the rest of the way to the village in silence. We stayed close together in the middle of the group. Every time someone bumped into me, I flinched. In my mind, I kept seeing the reflection, the slow steps, the blurred face. We never went near that cottage again. On future walks, if the path passed within sight of that field, I kept my eyes forward. I refused to look. Years have passed since that day. I have tried to explain it to myself. I have considered every logical possibility, a trick of light, our imaginations feeding off each other, some odd reflection caused by the angle of the mirror. But there is one detail that still unsettles me. The man in the mirror moved, not like a static shadow, not like something shaped by light. He moved with intention, and when we turned around, there was no one there. Sometimes, when I pass an old house with uncovered windows, I feel the same cold awareness crawl along my skin. If I catch my reflection in a dark window at night, I look twice to make sure I am alone. Because once, in a cottage that no one seemed to own, in a mirror that should have shown nothing but 4 children in a dusty landing, something stood behind us, and it was walking forward. If we had stayed even a few seconds longer, I don't know how close it would have gotten. I don't know whether it would have remained in the mirror or stepped out of it. I was spending the night at my boyfriend's house, something I had done so many times that it felt almost routine. His parents were gone for the night, and we had the whole place to ourselves. Their house had always felt calm to me. It was an ordinary suburban home with narrow carpeted hallways, framed family photos on the walls, and soft yellow lamps that gave everything a warm, safe glow. Even at night, it never felt threatening, just quiet. The only other living thing inside was the family cat, an old gray tabby that usually stayed downstairs. It liked to curl up on the couch or on the laundry pile in the utility room. It never came upstairs at night. The upstairs was always still, the air unmoving, the rooms heavy with silence once the lights were off. My boyfriend had never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. He was the type who needed proof for everything. See, if I ever mentioned feeling watched in the dark or hearing something strange, he would smile at me like I was a child who had seen a monster under the bed. "You just scare yourself," he would say. "Your brain fills in the blanks." He believed in sleep science, drafts in old houses, and logical explanations. I used to tease him that if a ghost stood at the foot of his bed, he would blame it on bad lighting. That night started like any other. We had stayed up late watching a movie in his room. Around midnight, we brushed our teeth, turned off the hallway lights, and went to bed. His room was at the end of the upstairs hallway, across from a small bathroom. The curtains were thin, so the streetlight outside always leaked in just enough to outline the furniture. Even in darkness, I could make out the dresser, the desk, and the door. I fell asleep quickly. The house felt peaceful, the quiet wrapping around me like a blanket. At some point deep in the night, I was jolted awake. It wasn't a loud noise, it was movement. My boyfriend had suddenly sat straight up in bed. The motion was so quick and sharp that it pulled me from sleep instantly. 1 second I was dreaming, the next my eyes were open and my heart was racing. He was sitting upright beside me, his back stiff, shoulders squared, head slightly tilted like he was listening. For a moment I thought he had heard something downstairs. Maybe the cat knocked something over, maybe someone was outside. Then he spoke. "Dude, turn on the light. It's here watching us." His voice was clear, not thick with sleep, not mumbled, not confused. Clear. It sounded exactly like it did when he talked to me during the day. Calm and steady. My brain struggled to catch up. I pushed myself up onto my elbows and squinted at him. His eyes were open. He wasn't blinking much. He was staring into the room, scanning it slowly. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, my throat dry. "Turn on the light," he repeated. "It's in here, watching us." The way he said it made my stomach drop. There was no panic in his voice, no drama, just certainty. For a second, I wondered if someone had actually broken in. The idea felt stupid and extreme, but his tone made it feel real. I listened hard for any sound downstairs. Nothing. The house was completely silent. "You're dreaming," I said softly. "No," he answered immediately. "Turn it on." I stared at him longer, trying to see any sign that he wasn't fully awake. But his posture was straight. His eyes were focused. He looked alert. The longer I hesitated, the more uncomfortable I felt sitting in the dark. So I slipped out of bed. The carpet felt cold under my feet. The air in the room seemed heavier than it had before. I walked to the wall and flipped the light switch. The room flooded with warm yellow light. Nothing was there. The dresser stood where it always stood. The closet door was shut. The desk chair was tucked in. The curtains hung still. The door was closed. My boyfriend slowly turned his head, looking around the room carefully. His breathing steadied. After a few seconds, he let out a small exhale. "Okay," he said quietly. "We're fine." Fine, like something had just left. I stood there for another moment, waiting for him to explain, but he didn't. He just blinked slowly and lay back down. I turned off the light. Darkness returned. Softer this time, but it didn't feel the same. I climbed back into bed. He rolled onto his side, facing away from me. "You made it go away," he murmured. Before I could respond, his breathing changed. It slowed and deepened. He was asleep, not drifting, not fading gradually, asleep. I lay there, staring at his back. My heart wouldn't slow down. I replayed his voice in my head. It hadn't sounded like sleep talking. I had heard him mumble nonsense before. This wasn't that. There had been structure in his sentences, intention. I told myself he must have been half asleep. Maybe he had been dreaming and his brain hadn't caught up yet. Eventually, exhaustion pulled at me again. I closed my eyes. I don't know how much time passed before I felt it. Not a sound, not movement, just a sense that something had shifted beside me. I opened my eyes. He was lying on his back this time, completely still. His face was turned toward the wall on my side of the bed. His eyes were open wide, fixed on something near the window. The streetlight outside cast a faint reflection across the wall and windowsill. It always did that. A long, stretched patch of pale light that reached halfway up the wall. "Look," he whispered. His voice was softer now, but still clear. "Look at the windowsill, the shadow." My body felt stiff. I didn't want to turn my head, but I did. The reflection looked normal, just light bending across the paint. "I don't see anything," I said quietly. "There," he said, lifting his hand and pointing. The ghost, it's sitting in the reflection." My throat tightened. The word ghost sounded wrong in his mouth. He didn't use that word, ever. His finger trembled slightly as he pointed, not from fear, from focus. "It's right there," he continued. "It's watching." I squinted at the light. I saw nothing but brightness and the faint shadow of the curtain's edge. "You need to wake up," I told him. "You're dreaming." He didn't blink. "Move it away," he said. "What?" "Move it away," he repeated calmly. "It's sitting there. You just have to move it." I felt trapped between two possibilities. Either he was sleepwalking with his eyes open, or something was happening that I couldn't explain. He reached across me. Since I was closest to the wall, he had to stretch over my body. His arm moved slowly but deliberately. He grabbed my wrist. His hand was warm, firm, not limp like someone asleep. He guided my hand toward the patch of light. "Just wipe it," he whispered, "like this." He pressed my palm against the wall and moved it back and forth across the illuminated area. My skin brushed the cool paint. I could feel the slight texture under my fingertips. As my hand moved, the light shifted slightly. My arm blocked part of it. The reflection wavered. For a split second, I thought I saw something change inside it. Not clearly, not a shape I could describe, just a slight disturbance, like something withdrawing. It could have been my shadow. It could have been my imagination. But in that moment, it felt like something pulled back. He watched intensely, his eyes tracking the movement. Then he nodded once. "There," he said quietly. "See? It's gone now." His grip on my wrist loosened. He rolled onto his side, pulling the blanket up to his chin. Within seconds, his breathing deepened again. Asleep, just like before. I didn't move. My hand stayed frozen against the wall long after he let go. The room felt different now. Not heavy, exactly, just aware. I slowly pulled my hand back and stared at the windowsill. The light looked the same as always, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been occupying that space. I listened carefully. The house was silent. Then faintly I heard something downstairs. A soft thud. I froze. The cat, I told myself. It had to be the cat. But the cat never came upstairs at night. I strained to hear it move again. Nothing. I lay back down, slowly facing the wall. I didn't dare turn my back to the room. Every small noise felt amplified. The ticking of the clock on his desk, the faint hum of electricity inside the walls, the subtle creak of the house settling as temperatures shifted. Hours seemed to pass. At one point I thought I heard a light step in the hallway outside his door, slow and soft. But when I held my breath to listen, it stopped. I never saw anything. I never heard anything clear enough to prove. But I didn't sleep. When morning light finally began to fill the room, it felt like a rescue. Sunlight erased the shadows and turned everything ordinary again. My boyfriend woke up stretching, yawning, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," he said cheerfully. I studied his face carefully. He looked completely normal. "Do you remember anything from last night?" I asked. He squinted at me. "What do you mean?" "You woke up twice," I said carefully. "You said something was watching us. You told me to turn on the light. Then you said there was a ghost sitting on the windowsill." He stared at me like I had just told him a joke he didn't understand. "I did not." "You did," I insisted quietly. You grabbed my hand. You made me wipe the wall. He shook his head slowly. I must have been dreaming. You know I talk in my sleep. This wasn't talking, I said. You were awake. I promise you, he replied. I don't remember any of that. He looked genuinely confused. We went downstairs together. The cat was asleep on the couch exactly where it always was in the morning. The front door was locked. The house looked untouched. Over breakfast, he acted completely normal. He laughed at something on his phone. He made coffee. He teased me for being quiet. I didn't tell him how terrified I had felt, but something lingered. That night replayed in my head again and again. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it, the certainty, the calm, and the way he had described the thing in the reflection, as if he were looking directly at it. In the days that followed, I noticed small things. Once, when we were in his room during the day, he paused and stared at the windowsill for a few seconds longer than necessary. When I asked what he was looking at, he shrugged. Nothing, he said. Another time, late in the evening, I saw him glance toward the corner of the room and then look away quickly. I asked if something was wrong. He smiled. You're rubbing off on me. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. I started avoiding sleepovers for a while. I blamed homework, early mornings, random excuses. When I finally stayed over again, I couldn't stop watching him as he slept. He looked peaceful, normal. But once, around 2 in the morning, his eyes opened slowly, not in surprise, not in fear, just open. They stared toward the window. My heart slammed in my chest. Are you awake? I whispered. His eyes shifted toward me. He blinked once. Then he closed them again. In the morning, he didn't remember that either. Even now, I try to convince myself it was nothing. Sleep disorders exist. People talk, sit up, even walk without remembering. Maybe his brain slipped into some strange, half-awake state. Maybe my own fear made everything worse. But there is one detail I can't forget. The exact tone of his voice when he said, "It's here watching us." There was no confusion in it. No imagination, just observation, like he was describing something real. And sometimes when I think about that reflection on the wall, I remember the way the light shifted when my hand moved across it. Not like a shadow changing, but like something stepping back. Something that had been sitting there, waiting. And I still wonder whether it left that night, or if it only needed to know that we could see it.